everyone. My name is Catherine Blythe. I am the president of ATEM, and it gives me great pleasure to be joining this session today. Told you so, people counting gold. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge our sponsor, Tribal, who is sponsoring the conference and this session today. Can I also suggest that if you are making comments that you please use the hashtag at TEM conference. If you are having any difficulty with the session, you can click on the red headset in the lobby, and that will take you through to the live support team who can help you out. There will be the opportunity for questions at the end of the presentation. So if you would like to ask questions, there is a discussion forum that you can use. I'd recommend that you use the discussion forum. There's also the live Q&A, which you can use. I'll keep an eye on both. But I understand that most people are using the discussion forum. If any questions are unanswered at the end, the speakers might be able to write the responses in the tab at the end of the presentation. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to our speakers today. So we've got Mr. Blair Daly, who's Associate Director of Space Planning and Timetabling at the Auckland University of Technology, and Mr. Corey Cook, Director of Space Planning and Timetabling also at AUT, Auckland University of Technology. They have both worked in the space planning and timetabling team at AUT for over 10 years. As ex-teachers, they both have a passion for education and seeing students succeed. They also recognise the need for efficient use of space to meet sustainability, financial and academic goals of the university. And over the last several years, they have worked with their estate's colleagues towards developing a fit-for-purpose estate, which provides for the needs of staff and for students, and it's also efficient. So over to you, Blair and Corey.
Thanks, Catherine, and kia ora koutou katoa from our homes in Auckland. Corey and I have worked together for about 12 years in space planning and timetabling. We've looked to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the AUT estate through better use of space and more sophisticated timetabling. To this end, the latest tool we've started using is people counting. In this presentation, we hope to take you through the process we went through, the drivers for us, and a couple of examples of where we've already reaped some benefits. So for today, Corey will start off with a little about AUT to paint a picture of why we implemented the people counting technology we did, and I'll take you through the system that we implemented and how it works. We'll then go through a couple of case studies where the technology is actually being used to solve some space issues for us. One, an example of containing space creep, and the other, a solution to overcrowding. We'll then finish off with a look at our future plans or dreams for this technology. Over to you, Corey.
Hello, everyone. AUT has 4 campuses, the 3 bigger ones conveniently named North, City and South. And we have a partnership with the High Performance Sport, which is our Millennium campus. Overall, AUT has just over 20,000 EFTs and over 200,000 square metres of buildings. We hover at around about 10 square metres per EFT, which is a very efficient space ratio. And we don't intend to increase this footprint. Now, a word about these slides. We're going to stamp a keyword on a number of slides that will indicate that something needs to be done in the space plan. Good systems and data. And if you put all these single words together, you will form the basis for a business case for things like people counting. The City campus is by far our largest. At 13,500 EFTs and a built environment of 160,000 square metres, this campus is right in the centre of Auckland, where land is scarce and expensive. Over the last decade, we have added some large buildings here, which has helped us get rid of some old and leased buildings which were never purpose-built, expensive to run and maintain. A current leased building we are exiting from is shown at right. It's 16,000 square metres that has been replaced by 9,000 square metres of new build. The rest has been reallocated throughout the rest of the campus. So space optimisation is occurring at each of these changes. Our North Campus is 8 kilometres away over the Auckland Harbour Bridge. Great location and has quite a bit of land by comparison. It started life as a teachers' training college and now houses mainly health programs. All of the 15 plus buildings there are old and non-purpose built. Included in this is a large block of prefabs and one converted hostel space that accommodates quite a number of staff. Screaming for redevelopment, we have begun to build a fantastic new building here. To do that, we needed to demolish 3 other buildings, which meant decanting all staff and teaching areas into the remaining part of the campus, with the exception of one leased building which went up the road. To ascertain what we could or could not fit involved a lot of calculations, data and know-how. So as space planners, we had to provide convincing, sound data and do a lot of persuading. Unfortunately, we only have an artistic view of this building shown at top right. The real building is just a hole in the ground at the moment, one of the casualties of COVID uncertainties. So we're really hoping to kickstart that building again very soon. The South Campus is our smallest campus. It has less than 10 buildings and started life as a business innovation site. Proportionately, this campus had experienced the largest changes year on, as it grew from very small beginnings. However, a few years ago, we built a building that you can see now, and this doubled. Included in that are 2 vacant floors for future development. That was growth, but now the focus swinging more towards change which is happening faster and faster as we see more of new programs, different teaching pedagogies, including online teaching, the demise of exams, and less use of lecture theatres, the effects of staff working from home, and a greater need than ever to make our campuses more relevant and attractive for staff and students to come to. These things require changes of space, careful planning, and working more than ever within budgetary constraints. Space is not unlimited, contrary to what many people seem to think, but there will be new demands. So we need to do better with what we have. We need to use space differently, wisely, fairly, and eliminate space waste and share the same space more. We know space is expensive, but if it falls on deaf ears, environmentally responsible use of space is increasingly something people are responding to. Regardless, space management and you need to understand the nuances of genuine space needs, and you need a good team, people that can stand in battle, but also you need good processes, systems, and tools. You need a space management database that records all spaces and lists basic attributes, a timetable system to optimize the number of times you can use the same space over and over again without clashes. About the timetable, each previous year, the timetable starts off with planned sizes for the next year. Then we change over to enrolment sizes at the beginning of the new year, which inevitably requires less space. But then, when classes are actually running, we don't really know how many people are in those classes, so we run an audit. We send people out with clipboards once or twice a year. The running around takes a couple of weeks. Then it takes ages to correlate and turn that into a report, which only provides a snapshot of what happened weeks or months ago. It's often challenged as wrong or atypical for that day or week. We want instant, accurate, live data and frequently and information that can be followed up on quickly and that is unchallengeable. We want to see trends over time, not just snapshots. We want people counters. Over to you, Blair.
Thanks, Corey. We've been looking at people counting technologies for a long time, but the cost and availability made it a difficult option until very recently. We've gone through a few iterations of thinking. We started with thermal cameras a while ago. We had a friend of a colleague who had a crack at implementing a solution with this technology, but that kind of fizzled out. We then moved on to an in-house Wi-Fi system with the timetable information overlaid over it. But it had a few issues around locating specific rooms or even floors in some cases. It may have been our infrastructure at the time, or the fact that the system tries to remember you for faster connections, so you can end up still connected to a lower floor than the one you were on. Around this time, we also saw Nicole Eaton's presentation at a TEMC dealing with RMIT's use of technology, which motivated us to push harder for it. And we did find a commercial solution based on Wi-Fi that integrated with our timetable system. We submitted a business case for this, which was accepted. Unfortunately, that company then decided it wasn't interested in the Southern Hemisphere, so we had to look around again. By this time, we'd found out that there were a lot more different solutions around, and after looking at a range of them, we decided to go with Coheratech and VemCount. We implemented over the 2019-2020 summer break, and we now have sensors being added as part of any new projects. The Zovis unit is the one that we decided on. It's pretty small, about 13 centimeters long, and is installed over each door. It basically looks straight down and looks for any objects that are a certain height that pass completely through a zone. That's the yellow line you can see in the bottom picture. No video was recorded or sent over the network, just the counts. So for each period of time, the unit sends a message to the software that says +2 or -3 and so on. And the software then collates those counts and amalgamates them with other doors if there are multiple entries to provide an actual count for the room at that time. The units are very simply attached, so the main installation involves running cables to the appropriate locations and connecting to the nearest comms room. The rest of the setup is done by Coheratech, and the counts then appear in a dashboard. For the initial implementation, we installed about 240 units in a variety of teaching rooms. We had a few in some open plan offices as well, but mainly because we anticipate that these will revert to either postgrad or classrooms in the future. As part of the implementation, we identified the spaces we were going to put sensors and came up with a naming convention. Coheratech then visited the campus and provided advice on the best places to put those units, the types of attachments, as not all places had nice flat ceilings. Our new engineering building, for example, has no ceilings at all. Everything is exposed. So we had to attach to cable trays, air conditioning units, or even concrete beams. We had three main focuses for the implementation. First, we wanted to have good coverage in our general teaching spaces. We wanted to ensure that spaces were being used when they were booked, and also to see to what extent they were being used. One of the reference sites we talked to commented that they had overbooked lecture theatres by 10%, assuming absences and so on. After installing people counters, they increased that to 20% as they saw that the rooms were always underused by at least that amount. People counters have shown this at AUT as well, in fact by even more, though we're not sure if this is a general finding or something related to COVID. We also looked at some specialist space. The majority of our space is specialist, so obviously there's some benefit to being able to make this more usable if it can be shared between programs or schools. Schools often believe that space is being used to capacity when they see it full of students. We wanted to see if it was full for the whole day or even for the whole week. While not part of the initial implementation, we have extended those sensors to include some postgrad spaces. The data from these spaces have allowed us to implement a more hot desk approach rather than dedicated spaces, as it was obvious that these rooms were really heavily used. Since then, we have also implemented the units in some large open plan office spaces to inform usage there. The data from all these spaces have seen enthusiasm from other areas of estates too, as they see the benefit of the information in helping with cleaning schedules, security schedules, and power usage. So the implementation was completed over the summer of 2019-2020, and we were ready to count in anger for the beginning of semester 1. And then COVID hit. There was nothing to count. I spent the start of the first lockdown here in New Zealand eagerly logging into the VMCount software and looking at a whole lot of zeros. However, after we got through all of that, we now have dashboards set up that show us live counts for our spaces. This is a screenshot from the VMCount dashboards. We can also add live graphs with comparisons to previous weeks or days. We can run reports for any past period to analyze usage of a space or multiple spaces. We can add comparisons to previous days, weeks, or months. The software also has an API, so it's possible to do other reporting in Power BI and to report against other systems. My personal dream report was a room audit report, which you can see here. This replicates the physical audits Corey mentioned earlier. You can see which department has booked a room at a certain time, the plan size that they asked for, the actual enrolments, all taken from Syllabus Plus, and then the actual number that turned up to the class. From this report, we are hoping to identify bookings with significantly lower numbers. Does this have an online option? Could it be scheduled in a smaller room? And so forth. And of course, we also want to see activities that weren't used at all that we can follow up on. All this information can be accessed the day after the booking occurs and followed up straight away. The software also lets us set up alerts that can advise when a room is above or below a certain number. These alerts can be just a visual cue on the dashboard, like the red box you see there, or it can be an email that's sent out.
We're now
Corey.
going to share a couple of case studies where people counting has directly helped us make some decisions. We have a relatively new architectural program at AUT that has been growing well. Each year, we've provided a new dedicated studio space for the new year's undergraduate intake, as well as a new yearly space for their postgrads. We've covered 2 years of this now, but next year we need to provide another space for year 3s and still more postgraduate space. The marketing ploy for this degree was to provide a studio culture, which means a dedicated space for each year's cohort. Class cohorts are taught only 3 days per week for 4 hours, and then for the rest of the week, students do their own project work and have the studio undisturbed for the rest of the time. We knew we had no more space in their building and that something, probably their postgrad students, would need to be relocated to an entirely different building to make space for their next year's demands. This meant demolishing a whole floor of offices in the other building to create a studio space at a cost of around $750,000 of minor capital works. This at a time when money is scarce and the university space is limited because of the decanting of the big building that I showed you earlier on. Back in the office last year, we were not convinced that the space they already had was used sufficiently well to justify yet more space. But we had to contend with academic pedagogy and disbelief as to how inefficiently the space was being used. So we went to discuss, but this time we were armed with some indisputable people counting data. And from that, we thought they needed to teach more days per week, have more classes taught in the same space, and appeal to them that limited university space meant that we would need to take space away from somebody else for their group. And if they saw the usage stats that they were experiencing, it would be difficult to persuade them. Furthermore, creating another space was going to be financially hard to justify and frankly, environmentally irresponsible. We went through the people counting data for each of their spaces and a typical studio looked like this. It shows the 3 days per week that their classes were being taught. That the 100 plus enrolled in each class, the actual numbers turning up were 70 to 80 early on and declining after that. The self-directed learning was consistently in or near single-digit numbers in quite large spaces. And we said, if we had figures like this in any other area of the university, the school growing or not, we'd take it away. Something needed to be done. To their credit, they were horrified to see these numbers. The reality was suddenly believable. They needed to see that data, and we needed to show them that, and we needed to show them that as a fact. They then, much to our surprise, started to drive the changes needed to a really good outcome, which was a shared common quiet space for their postgrads with another school's postgrads. Teach in a space more than once and opt for some storage solutions for the students' project works. This then enabled the year threes to be scheduled within the space they already had and provided us with a sustainable model for their future space needs. A really great outcome, which represented a quantifiable saving of $750,000 in minor capital works for next year, and a reduced OPEX cost year on year after that. So all good. Leah.
The second case study looks at our prayer room. This is a space which is above a car park, so has restricted numbers of 150 for structural reasons and for fire egress. The university has a memorandum of understanding with the users, but we needed to ensure that we meet our obligations under the health and safety regulations. There are particular times when the space is heavily used, and we needed to ensure that we were able to manage that high use, but ideally we didn't want to do this in a heavy-handed way or in a way that required a lot of resource on our part. In short, we wanted the users to be able to manage it themselves, but to be accountable for that management and to enable that based on good data. Fridays are when large numbers are expected, and during Ramadan, these were especially high. To manage this, we installed a people counter in the entrance hall. It's small to see, but it's just at the top there on the roof. And a digital sign in the foyer with a specific count of people inside, based on API data, and some useful messaging about entry. While numbers are low, there is a green for go approach with a message to enter. Once those numbers get to capacity, a red for stop message appears, indicating that people will need to wait until others leave before entering. This approach allowed the users to manage the capacity themselves, but with good visible data to back up their approach. We're also able to go back and see the numbers and provide these to the users so that they can see how they've done. We also set up an alert so that security were aware of any high numbers, but at this stage, security haven't had to react. The users are managing the numbers themselves for the most part.
So the future of people counting for us. We'd like to get more people counting devices and collect more data because we think we can get good returns on investment. So we want to look more closely at the effect of online learning, staff accommodation in the age of working from home, get the timetable to relock and turn off aircon if a teaching space is not used. Inform ourselves more on whether we need to do more or less, for example, cleaning in specific areas. Provide alerts around maximum or minimum numbers to trigger further actions, and get a better idea about numbers of people on a floor in a building, or even traffic flows through a building. Many of these things will be helpful around emergency management and other things. So to sum up, when you put all these keywords together that we've shown on the various slides, you have a case for the data you need to build your confidence and to help you convince others that you need people counting. Believe us? Told you so. Any questions?
Thank you. Blair and Corey, that was great. There's been a couple of questions come in the discussion forum, and someone I assume is one of your colleagues, David Curry's been answering them.
Thanks, Dave.
So one was just, are you talking about UFA or GFA? And he responded that it was GFA. I don't actually know what either of those acronyms mean, so it's good to know. And then there was a question about the error, kind of how accurate the data was. Did you have any comment? David said it was above the 90s, but did you have any comment on that?
Yep, it was above 90%. The last room audit that we did in 2020, we also sent a person around with the people counting on their cell phone, and they recorded what the people counter said, and they counted the number of people in rooms. And the by far the majority of rooms were over 90%. Some of them were up to 98% accurate. The ones that weren't, it was a great check for us, so we could go back and have a look, and it usually meant that we hadn't included a door in the room for the entries or exits or something like that, so we're able to identify some issues for that.
So there's a few, thank you. There was a few questions about cost. So the implementation cost, the ongoing maintenance cost, and if you had any comment about the failure rate of the products.
The cost-wise, and it's very hard to sort of say exactly how much we're spending because we did a big implementation to start with, and then we've done other ones since. But we basically work on a cost of around about 2,000 New Zealand dollars per unit. That includes the unit itself, installation, and then ongoing licensing fees for the dashboard and the software that we're looking at. And failure rates, we are told that failures almost don't happen. We certainly haven't had any in the 2 years they've been installed there at the moment, and they've all worked pretty well.
Thank you. And a question about the timeline to implement. So how did you implement them? Did you do it all? How did you implement it?
We did a lot to start with. So we had the budget approved. So we basically transferred that budget to the people counter units. But since then, we've continued to add to them. So we now, any new project, we automatically include a sensor in that. So we have some buildings that are completely covered in the teaching spaces. We have other buildings that have 3 or 4 rooms that have been recently refurbed. Sorry, anything else, Corey, that you would add to that?
Yeah, no, that's right. But there are some rooms that we've put people counters in anticipation of a change that we're aware of, some change next year or something like that. So we're armed with the data now. Yep.
Nice, thank you. So we've just got just over a minute left, but there's just a couple of last questions. One, if you've seen, there's things. If you've seen a shift in the students moving to the HiFlex kind of blend classes, and what sort of attendance you're seeing in terms of that when there's an option for Zoom and in-person classes.
Well, what we have seen in terms of online is classes that are around about 50% or so on average of what we thought was in there. And in terms of staff attendance, and there's places where we do have some of those, it's around about 30 to 40% staff attendance. But of course, it is a COVID time, so it is a little tricky, but those are the figures that we're looking at the moment.
Thank you. We've only got 20 seconds left. There was just a couple more questions, but I don't think we're going to have time to answer those. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again to Tribal for sponsoring the session. And if you return to the timeline, and you can join the next session in 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll have a look at those questions shortly.
Sure. I think I'm still live. Well, if we're still here, if the people are here, there we go.
Right.
The last question I didn't get to was about the cost of cabling and all that kind of thing, and whether the $2,000 included that.
Right.
It did.
Yes. So, oh, I see.